welcome to Fright Club. I'm Gav from the Fright Club NI. This is our very first ever episode of Fright Club TV, which will be exclusive to our IGTV account, so please follow us on there if you can. We thank you for your continued support on Instagram and on Twitter. So for our first episode, we decided to throw it out to our Twitter followers and ask them to throw some questions our way that we will answer tonight. And we've picked 4 or 5 out tonight that we think kind of sums up our love for the horror genre. So we're going to jump straight in with the questions. And the first one comes from Adam Neeson. He is asking us about our favourite horror remakes. Now, remakes, it's a bit of a weird one. Nobody really likes a remake. Or whenever they get announced, people always sort of roll their eyes and be like, ooh, come up with something new. But there's been some amazing remakes out there, especially in the horror genre. When horror fans are asked about horror remakes, they generally always talk about 2 that spring to mind, first of all. And that is John Carpenter's The Thing and David Cronenberg's The Fly. So The Thing was a remake of an old black and white B movie from the 50s, I believe. And The Fly was also a remake by David Cronenberg. Both those movies are phenomenal. I mean, they completely reinvented the story. Those are the 2 that always get kind of mentioned when horror fans talk about remakes. Or not just horror fans, just remakes in general. Another one that springs to mind is the remake of Fright Night. Fright Night is one of my favourite vampire movies from the 80s. There's quite a lot of cool vampire movies from the 80s. Fright Night is definitely up there with The Lost Boys and Near Dark, with Colin Farrell, Anton Yelchin, and who else was in it? David Tennant as well was in it. It's a really good remake. I didn't actually watch it until not that long ago, a few years ago. I was kind of like, I don't really want to watch this. Why would they remake Fright Night? I just don't really want to watch it. I did watch it and I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, it's quite a different tone. Although there is comedy aspects in there. I think Colin Farrell was a big surprise in that one. So quite happily enjoyed that one. I think for me, my favourite remake of all time is Night of the Living Dead, 1990, which is produced by George Romero and directed by one of his closest friends, Tom Savini, starring Tony Todd as the lead role, Ben. For me, it's better than the original. A lot of people might query that, saying, what are you talking about? But for me, it's better. I preferred the remake to the original. The original, obviously, is one of the most important horror movies of all time. It completely invented a genre, and it helped horror filmmakers pick cameras up and go out and just film. You know, it wasn't a studio film. It was an independent film, and it really kicked off the whole zombie genre that we know and love today. But Tom Savini, who is an absolute god to me, he's a special effects guru, up there with Jack Pierce and Stan Winston and Rick Becker and Mark Schulstrom, all those boys. I love all those cool special effects artists, and Tom Savini's right up there as being the best of a bunch. He was a close friend of George Romero. Tom Savini he was an actor at a younger age. He did theatre work. He met Romero when he was quite young. They've remained friends throughout his career. And when it came to making a decision on remaking Night of the Living Dead, Romero chose Tom Savini. I think Savini was a little bit reluctant at start, but, took the challenge with open arms, and they did a fantastic job. I think what he did with the new movie is that he took something that was, very relevant at that time period and still relevant today. And he really, he amped everything up. He just made it, he made everything about it more important even now than what it was back then. And the ending really hits hard. And I think all the performers in it, all the actors in it are fantastic. And it's definitely worth a shout out if you can watch it. If you haven't seen it and you're sort of putting it off because you're like, oh, it's a remake of one of the greatest movies of all time, just watch it. You won't regret it. It's a different take on it. There's certain scenes that are the same. The characters are different, even though they're the same. They have different approaches to the character. Barbara is a completely different character. And Tony Todd is amazing at it. So check that out if you haven't already done so. Thanks, Adam, for the question. On to our next question, and it's from Chantal Laura Handley. Now, Chantal is, I hope I'm saying that name right, and I apologise if I'm not. She's an artist from Australia, I think, and she uses pastels, and she's a fantastic artist. And if you can check her out on Twitter, follow her on Twitter and check out her Etsy account. I think it's in the link on her Twitter account. Amazing artist. So check her work out. But she's asking us about our favourite soundtracks and our favourite scores. So, interesting question. We'll probably do a full episode on our favourite scores or soundtracks coming up on our IGTV. But today I'll just talk about a couple of ones briefly. Outside of the horror genre, I'm a massive John Williams fan, huge Star Wars fan. Love all John Williams scores, Star Wars mainly, but E.T., Jurassic Park. Also love Indiana Jones and Superman. I mean, he's just one of the greatest composers of all time. And, you know, a huge influence on my love of movies growing up through my childhood into my teenage adult life. Another composer that I really love is Howard Shore, mostly because of The Lord of the Rings. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan too, and have rediscovered some of his older stuff through my love of Lord of the Rings. And Alan Silvestri as well is a fantastic music composer. Back to the Future is legendary. But also love some of his earlier stuff. And Predator is a fantastic score. I just love the theme to Predator. It just gets my blood going. And it's very similar to his music from The Abyss as well, the James Cameron movie starring Michael Biehn. But when it comes to horror, I'd have to say that one of my favourite scores is Bernard Herrmann's score for Psycho. Mostly everybody will probably have this in their top 5 horror scores, just because it was so influential, so important. I mean, the movie itself is one of the most important movies ever, not just in the horror genre. And the score is also just unreal. It gives me goosebumps every time I listen to it. Not just the shower scene, but some of the other melodies that's played even at the start of the movie. It's just, love the score. Love the movie as well, obviously. And Bernard Herrmann is an absolute legend when it comes to composing for films. Obviously, he had a great relationship with Alfred Hitchcock, who directed Psycho, and he did a few of his other movies as well. I'd have to say that Psycho probably was one of my favourite scores. If I don't choose that as my favourite horror score, then I'm going to choose this one, which is Candyman by Philip Glass. Released in 1992, Candyman it was a new horror film. It was a new horror villain, directed by Bernard Rose and based on Clive Barker's short story called The Forbidden. Tony Todd, again, completely blows out of the water here. He's unreal in this, amazing. But something else that stands out other than his performance is the music from Philip Glass. And I was reading recently that Bernard Rose, when he was talking to one of the producers, and they were talking about the music for the film and the tone, and he was a big Philip Glass fan, and he threw his name in the hat just as a random choice, not thinking that it would ever happen. But coincidentally, the producer of the film was quite friendly with Philip Glass. I think he had worked on another film of his previously, and so he was able to give him a call and get him on board. And I think Philip Glass was a little bit reluctant at the start because he was like, oh, a horror movie, I don't really want to be involved in that. But once they sat him down and told him the story, let him read the script, you know, I mean, it's not just a horror movie. Candyman is such an important movie, and it kind of sort of breaks the walls with the horror genre as well. Philip Glass was on board, and his score for the Candyman, it really is amazing. And if you can check that out, you won't regret it. So on to our next question. This is from Jim McMorrow, who I believe is quite an accomplished filmmaker himself. And I love his Twitter handle, That's Not Winston. That's a wee shout out to American Werewolf in London. So he's asking about what horror movies have we sort of taken home with us that kind of stuck with us. This is a difficult one as well. Horror is something that, as a genre, will always stick with you. That's just, you know, that's what horror is. Or the best horror will always stick with you, and that's why I love it, and that's why so many other people love it. I think the horror movies that I've taken home with me that have stuck with me are ones that I kind of don't really enjoy. I don't really like the home invasion movies, like Strangers. And I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that movie. It's something that I can't rewatch because it is so close to home about somebody coming in to your home and invading your home. It's quite, that's probably the most horrific thing that you can watch because it is so real. So Last House on the Left's pretty brutal. Although I did like Mike Flanagan's movie Hush, which is a fantastic movie made a few years ago. It's quite a low budget movie, and I think it's on Netflix. So if you haven't seen it, check that out. It's about it's kind of about a home invasion as well, but it's got a really good twist and a really good hook, and it's really fun to watch. Outside of those ones, the ones that I've watched that I've taken home that I honestly don't think I could rewatch again. Under the Skin, Jonathan Glazer. A fantastic movie, but just so uncomfortable to watch, especially those scenes that you know what I'm talking about. So uncomfortable. And Scarlett Johansson it's a very different performance that she gives in that movie, and it was really unsettling to watch. And another very unsettling movie is Gaspar Noé's Irreversible. Not a horror film, but just filled with a lot of horrific imagery. That scene in the tunnel that it's a brutal rape scene, and it's very hard to watch. I don't think I could watch the movie again just based on that scene alone. But there is another scene where Vincent Cassel is quite violent to somebody else, and it's just like, oh wow, I didn't expect that. It's kind of Ari Aster Midsummer is reminiscent of some of Gaspar Noé's earlier work, and it's a difficult scene to watch, and it's a difficult film to watch as well because it kind of hits home as well, and that kind of stuff happens in real life, so it's quite horrific. So that's a couple of suggestions there of films that have hit hard with me that I probably won't rewatch again. Not based on their quality, very good films, but just hard to watch. We'll just do one more question. And this one's from Chris at Chris Movies Corner. He's asking about what single movie, if there is one, that made me fall in love with the horror genre. And this is going to be an easy one for me. If there is a single movie, there's definitely a single franchise that made me fall in love with the horror genre, and that would be A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's my favorite horror franchise of all time. It's one of my favorite franchises of all time. But the original Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, written and directed by Wes Craven, for me is probably my favorite horror movie of all time, and definitely up there in my top kind of 5 or 6 favorite movies of all time. I know some of the later movies kind of go a bit sort of comedy. They changed Freddy Krueger from like this maniacal child murderer into a sort of pop culture icon, which is great. But a lot of the comedic aspects come through and take over from the horror aspects, which isn't always a bad thing. And you kind of have to expand on the genre whenever you're doing so many movies. The first Elm Street movie that I remember watching was A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4: Dream Master, starring Lisa Wilcox as Alice. And it just stuck out in my head because I remember renting it from the video store. And obviously I was only a kid at the time. I shouldn't have been watching that movie, but I used to rent a lot of horror film. Well, my sister used to rent them, and I used to stay with my sister at the weekends. And the Elm Street franchise was one that we used to always watch, and that one in particular sticks out in my mind just because I don't know if it was definitely the first one that I saw, but it was the one that sticks in my mind. And that last scene in the church when Alice fights Freddy, and she's the montage before that where it's kind of like a Rambo montage where she's got the the bracelet and the belt and the headband, and she's putting the parts of all her dead friends, she's putting them onto herself because she needs to build the strength up to fight this monster Freddy Krueger. And they fight in a church, and it's not the greatest fight, let's be honest, but it's still amazing to watch now. They're doing a bit of kung fu and a bit of wrestling and a bit of fighting and a bit of punching, and there's some cool imagery there where, you know, stained glass windows and all, when Freddy dies, and Freddy dies, he doesn't ever really die, but you know what I mean. So that's the first one that really that stuck in my mind. And because I watched that, I went back and watched the rest of them. Obviously, Dream Warriors is amazing, absolutely amazing. So much cool imagery in that too. So many cool characters, so many cool scenes. They really expanded the story with Dream Warriors. But I'll always go back to the very first A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one, just because it's. I just think it's the best. I think it's the best of the bunch. I know other people will say it's a bit cheesy and a bit corny, and there's a lot of plot holes and things don't add up. But you know, not everything should add up in horror movies. Let's go back to horror movies that didn't answer every single detail, and you know, you didn't have to explain absolutely everything in a horror movie, because that's what was great about a horror movie. It was fantastical. It was supernatural. You didn't have to go, well, why did this happen and why did that happen? You just went, oh wow, that happened. Oh my god, that's horrific. I hope that never happens in my real life. You know, that's what's amazing about horror. And you know, you get franchises like that happen, and definitely the Elm Street one was one of those franchises. And you know, there's other great franchises out there. Of course, you've got like the Hellraiser, the Halloween, Friday the 13th. You know, all legendary franchises. But for me, Nightmare on Elm Street will always be the top franchise. And the very first Nightmare on Elm Street is the single movie that made me fall in love with the horror genre. So thanks for your question, Chris. That's all really we've got time for right now. Again, just want to thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you for your continued support on Instagram. And if you can follow us on Twitter too, that would be cool, at the Fright Club NI. And check out the website, www.thefrightclubni.com. So that's really it. That's it, guys. Thanks very much again for joining us. If you want to comment down below. If you want to answer any of the questions that I've answered in this video, feel free to answer or to give your answers in the comments below. And you know, tell all your horror friends about us, where they can find us on social media. But until next time, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you in the dark side.